Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturist podcast. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen, in the famous
Or
world.
morning if you
It's
watch
not
this
morning.
in the morning.
It's not. Why would you watch it in the morning?
Because that's when it actually gets released.
Does it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not involved in that part of it. I'm not involved in any part of the show, the newsletter, the blog, or anything else. Have we not established this? Oh,
Wow.
we're live. Let's get going. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, ladies and gentlemen, in the famous words of Will Ferrell, the famous Leeds United investor. How is everybody doing on the podcast and listening? I am sure you are wonderful. We are wonderful. Heavily into recording season post. Had a break, but me and Ben had a little bit. We built some up, didn't we, Ben, over time, and in an intense period. So if you are listening and you are still in education, wow. If I had a hat on, Ben, you've got one on, take it off. Because whether you are an educator, whether you are a learner, whether you are an IT professional leader, it's the 18th of September. That's when we're recording. I've given the game away, Ben. And you must be on your knees, ladies and gentlemen. And just looking from the outside in. So hope is going to reinvigorate and re-inspire and keep you going for another couple of weeks until the one after. So without further ado, let's bring in our guest. How are we doing? Let's introduce you. Introduce yourself. Let's start there.
Hi. I am Naomi. Naomi Toland. I've just been sunbathing in Derry, which doesn't normally happen. So I think I just want to put that into the world that it's now 21 degrees and I was sunbathing, which is beautiful. So yeah, I just moved back home from Derry, from New Zealand, and excited to be on the podcast.
So I was struggling to do the unmute thing that Steve does all the time. I take the piss out of him every single time.
And I think we need to explain what's happened here. Me and Ben need to own up, and we are both very heavy breathers. We've discussed this on the podcast recently. Both very heavy breathers. You either listen to us and listen like it's like a scene from Star Wars and Darth Vader's walking through the corridor, or struggle to find the mic. You can't get both. It's one or the other. It's just the way it is. So we
paused.
thought that.
He's looking at me, being like,
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I do. I breathe really heavy,
So do
so
I.
I mute myself and then forget to unmute myself when I start speaking. But yeah, Naomi, so you are a Derry girl, come back to Derry, travelled the world. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because obviously I know you've taught internationally and all that kind of stuff, and then we can get into some of the cool stuff that you're doing now.
yeah. So I moved away at 18. So I've been away for 33 years, 13 years. I'm looking good for my age. It's actually my birthday on Saturday, so the 21st of September. So it'll be 13 years I've been away as of this year. So I went away and taught in London for a couple of years. And then I went to New Zealand, taught over there, and then went to Japan for a year and then come back to New Zealand. Did a little bit of digital transformation across a couple of schools. And then loads of change happened to me this year, which ended up bringing me back home, which is exciting because I got to connect with you guys and see what's happened over this side of the world. So
Interesting story, right? So you've got you've done. Did you say Thailand? You've done. Is that right? List some of the countries that you've been in, because it's pretty extensive, right? You said London, Thailand, New Zealand,
Bali, South America. The only ones I have, my big goal this year is to go to Africa and see what that's like. Because I think for me, I really am. I love traveling, but also I'm really interested in just humans. I'm really interested in how like different communities work, how different people work, and I think that's where the whole human hub, which I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about today, came from. Is how do humans live their lives and why do humans do what they do? And I think that's where I'm really interested in travel and seeing how different people explore that. So
we will step in to whole education. But met through the Google Champion Symposium, OPA. Was it October last year?
I think it was November last year. How mad that? We're nearly come up to a year.
That is mad. I was like, probably about 6 months ago. No, it's almost a year ago. Wow, and you've not ditched me and Ben yet. So we're doing all right, Ben. Absolutely fantastic. It's probably our longest friendship outside of. So we're doing all right. Let's keep going. Doing well. So we met there, and I think it's one of those things where, just like-minded wackos. I think I remember, I can't remember whether we were in the Guinness factory or whether we're in the Google, one of the sessions, or what was going on, we sat next to each other. We were like, yeah, let's just have a bit of a chat. And then I think one of us swore, probably me. And then we looked at each other and I went, you know what? I'm just going to be honest. I'm at the age now where I'm not going to repeat what I said, but a full couple of swear words. And I was like, if you want to be my kind of people, it's absolutely fine. But I'm probably just not going to change now. And you went, it's fucking fine by me. And then it was just like laughter. And I think it's just one of those things where friendships just happen. I think people are brought together through serendipity, I think, at some
And I
points.
think
And I
that's
think
what's
us three
cool.
were
It's like,
destined to meet.
before I was coming back home, like I felt when we first met, I hadn't planned to come back home yet. But I think whenever I left that weekend of seeing yous and meeting yous, and it kind of allowed me to see that you can have permission to kind of do what you need, get shit done, as well as having a good time. And I think that's what like I've loved this year, is like connecting with yourselves and like seeing what you're doing with Edufuturists. And it's actually given me permission a little bit, because I came away from doing my podcast and stuff because I think I was kind of almost becoming something that I wasn't, to try and fit in with like getting my message across. And I think that's why I kind of paused for a while, because I was like, I know I'm becoming something I'm not, but I don't know how to be me in this space. And I think that's what's cool about connecting with yourselves, like that kind of thing. It's we can talk real and be our honest selves, as well as doing things that actually matter. It's cool to connect and have a good time. And yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we won't be invited onto the government list, or we won't be invited to the government because we're on the list. I don't know if everybody knows a famous list. Bob Harrison's probably top. We're probably up there. That's absolutely fine.
I
Maybe
don't want to.
list.
Thank you, girl.
Nah, I'm all right, thanks. But I
I
think
wondered what list you were talking about, whether it's a watch list, a list that my wife works on, because I'm not on that list. If anybody
Okay.
don't know, my wife's in the police and works with certain types of offenders. I'm hoping I'm not on that
Yeah,
list.
none of us are on that list. None of us
No,
are on
no,
that
no,
list. We're definitely not. We are on the list where certain political focused over the last 14 years, apparently the previous government was creating a list of people that they definitely wouldn't be involved and connected with. And you know what? I wish I was on that list. I would love to see the list at some point and just go, I made the ability to not go in and be told what to do, I think. But I think that's the thing where, and from that event, we then connected. We just carried on every now and again. You were over then, and then one day you were just like, should we catch up? Yeah, catch up. And then you're like, oh, I'm just going to Bali now. And I was like, I'll touch base with you after. And I was like, what's going on? Ben had spoke to you at that point, and we're not going to dive into too much, but we're like, right, she's on the move. And I think the route is there and on the way back home. And it did then coincide with you helping us out. And one thing to shout out is your help behind the scenes on the night of the Edufuturist Uprising as well was pivotal, because we can't do it all. The community, our friends, we lean on and we need that support. And you were the person who was there when everybody walked through the door to give the tokens and give the trends booklet. And I think the thing that I took and I was like really positive about was where you said, you know what, absolutely love this, because I kind of knew it, but what people told us about the event and what you shared with the event was what you say, you just do. You get shit done, as you said, but we really don't want to navigate away from and become an event or a podcast or anything different to really what we stood by right at the very beginning.
I think that's what like is very interesting, because I was listening to your podcast with, was it Dr. Jill talking about like rebellion and talking about disruption and things. And I think I was actually having a conversation this morning with someone from here, and we were talking about like disruption can sometimes be like, or radical change can be seen as like a negative thing, or like you're trying to like go against the thing. And actually it is going against something, but it's not trying to like do it in a negative way. And I think that's what I loved about the Edufuturist event, was like you're proving that it can be, there is an alternative to the current system or the current way of making things happen. And you're proving it through the trends booklet. Whenever I seen the trends booklet, I was like, these guys mean business. This is actually, they've done a little bit of homework. And I think that's what's cool, is like there's like things that can, you have trends and you can do it in a fun way. It's not, you have to be sitting down for like hours in front of like a meeting. I can be like, no, like let's have a good time and let's talk about stuff that actually matters. I think that's what I loved about the event. That's why I was like a cheerleader. I was like, let's go. I love that. And even like the next day as well, like having that chat, I was a bit worse for wear, which I was very proud of myself for getting there, because I was like not too sure if I was going to get to that next day. Like actually like that next day, having those chats, being able to like follow up and be like, what are we going to do about the trends that we're seeing? And then you get people who actually care, and then you get people in the community. Like I've started following up with Ed and following up with Alan and people who actually were at that day. And then you get connections based on interests, and then you get connections based on actually making stuff happen in the future too. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, that's cool. It's cool. And I think it ties really nicely into that whole conversation, because I think there's a synergy and a we're on the same page conversation. And I think that what you're trying to build and what you've built over I suppose the last few years, as you've developed your own skills and yes, done the tech stuff, yes, been working with schools and leaders and in that space, but you've actually now set up out on your own and moved into an exciting space that resonates with our mission and drive, our kind of MO as humans to consider that actually, we say this about students all the time, that they're more than results. It's not just about exams. It's not just about filling them full of knowledge. They are more than just the transactional the transactional nature of what a lot of education can be about. And interestingly, that ties really nicely, I think, hopefully segues into what you're now doing. So I suppose before you tell us about the whole human hub, I'll put my teeth back in, the whole human hub. Maybe tell us the journey to get to that and a little bit, and then we can get into what it's about.
So I think like the whole human hub is the whole human hub for me is it came about because in my first year teaching, I actually started getting really bad migraines, like really bad. Like it was almost like every single day I was getting migraines, and so that was kind of an initial personal journey for me. Was why is that happening to me whenever it wasn't happening before? There's obviously something going on in my environment to make those things happen in my body to have that response. But when I went to the doctor, she kind of just said, "You're not breathing properly. Take this medication." And she wasn't wrong whenever she said you're not breathing properly, but she didn't actually go into what's going on for me to then unpack that rather than just going straight to the medication. And like, I'm not against medication at all. There's time and place for everything, but I'm really interested in how we support our whole body and learn about our whole body. So that kind of my first year teaching, I was 21, moved country, moved city by myself, started up a whole community in London, first year of teaching. Like there were so many reasons why, of course, my body was responding in that way. And so I started learning about the brain, learning about the body, learning about how we learn. And the more I learned about myself personally, the more I learned about my students who I was working with. And I kind of use the analogy of it's almost like a mechanic not getting taught about a car. Like it really baffles me that like educators aren't taught about the systems that they're actually working with, like working with the brain, working with the body. And that kind of got me interested in the more I learned about my own responses to the world, like my mind, my body, my like well-being. Then it kind of transferred into how I was teaching my kids. Like when I was teaching in London, I had kids who were coming in not being fed. I had kids who were coming in like getting like all the things of the day. Like I was teaching in Hoxton, and my school was the most beautiful. I really, really, really respect what my school was doing, and they were trying to do all the things even within that space. But it just got to me that my kids need support beyond just academics. So that's where the kind of the whole human hub came from, and it's kind of like stayed its true mission since then. But I've seen the why even more. Like working in Japan, working in New Zealand, seeing the diverse range of kids from all different backgrounds, all different needs. There's still consistently we need to look beyond just academics. It's not either or. It's and for me. How do we weave them both together and set kids up for success?
Very similar to education technology, edtech and development, development in terms of educators, all of those kind of things. Do you think that to develop holistic learners and a holistic education system that we have to prepare like we are or should be with all those educators exactly the same in terms of their understanding of the whole human? Is that why you've set it up? Do you think that is where your support and the role of the whole human hub comes in? Because we can't prepare others without understanding it ourselves, do you believe?
I think that's why I'm like actually so like before this all came about before AI was in the space, before I even got really into the digital space. That has happened since then. But I think for me, education is about setting kids up for success holistically. Like that's what the whole point of education is to keep them. And I think I talk about not the idea of setting them up for success in the future. It's setting them up for success right now. Like so many times we talk about kids as in like their exams later on or their whatever is coming up for them, like those transitional periods, but they are humans right now in the classroom. They are actual little human beings learning how to be people in that space. And so it's meeting them where they're at. And I think that's where the holistic side of things comes to, is me as a teacher, I wasn't taught about how to support kids holistically. I was taught about kind of a little bit psychology, a little bit of something. But I think the whole human idea is that, like you're saying, that training for AI is really important. And I think I followed some things about human intelligence as well, because like the humans, it's where do humans fit in an AI world? And we're getting so much training around digital space, which is important because that's what we actually are. That's the world we're in. And how do humans at the same time get built to, because if you look at the mental health statistics, if you look at all the wellness things that are going on, that's because people are disconnected. And my journey myself has been because I was disconnected from my own body. I was disconnected from my own space, my own needs, my own wants, my own understanding of who I am. And I think this whole year has been connecting myself back to me. And I think that's what is really important, is how maybe we don't have to be disconnected in the first place. I don't know, like maybe if we have those learnings in when we're first at school, when we're growing, when we're developing, can we stay connected to our bodies? Can we keep that learning in that space so that we don't have adults at the space having to reconnect and having to heal? That's where my interest is. And I haven't got the exact answer right now. I have got some things I'm working with growth leadership. But I'm very much interested in researching how that works as well. So yeah.
Okay, so now I'm intrigued here, right? So I am a guy who I've been a lad's lad my whole life. I know that most people say you're not a lad's lad. You're sensitive. You're like emotional. Yeah, I am that, but I'm also a lad's lad. I fought against breath work. I fought against cold water. I fought against grounding. And by the way, you'll be proud of me that on Friday last week, I said to my coach that sometimes I feel like there's a lot too much going on. I feel like I carry too much pressure and this and that. And he went, when was the last time you just actually stopped? And I was like, what do you mean stopped? He went, have you ever like sat there or led there for an hour doing nothing? I was like, that I don't even know what that means. Like he said, like not watching anything, not reading anything, not listening to a podcast, not planning what your next thing is, just sitting there. He said, why don't you try it? So I said, yeah, okay. And he said, got an idea. Why don't you go and sit outside and take your shoes off and your socks off? I'm like, what? You're gonna start asking me to like doing chanting and all that kind of shit soon. And I'm like, no. But I literally last Friday I set myself an hour and I went and sat outside in Harrogate, took my shoes and socks off and put my feet on the ground. Now I'm not going to come here and say like it was transformative, it changed my life, but actually that awareness of there being something more than just feeding, even things that fill my cup, but actually the whole conversation that I am more than just my output, and thinking around that. And the reason why I say that is that I know that in the work that you're doing, and it'd be cool to kind of talk a little bit about that. You're trying to get people to get in touch with that space and then move into that awareness of what do you need to do to feed more than just your brain, right?
I think that's what I'm really interested in. Again, the whole human. Like you said about being a lad's lad, and then you're putting your feet in the grass and stuff. Like it's almost like sometimes we get boxed into a certain element of who we are, and I think that's fine. Like that's the way that humans work. We need to kind of see the world in a certain way to be able to make sense of it. But I'm really interested in, like, I've had an MMA fight in 2019, and then this year my exploration is learning about, like you say, like the woo woo stuff with like meditation and with all that, like opening up to breath work. And I think that's where I'm really interested in, is not being in the box, like not being this, like you say, the cookie cutter way of actually looking at things. And I think that's where, because I've been looking at the idea of like the whole human, and like with NLP. So I've learned about NLP and looking at how people process the neuro-linguistic programming, how we look at the program that we have in our bodies to then rewire and reset and reprogram to give more resourceful tools. And so I'm looking at the idea, sometimes we're running away from stuff. So like you say, like always on your mind, chasing the next big thing, or like running away from what you don't want to be anymore, like changing that way. But the things I've been looking at this year is like being and becoming. So instead of like running away from something or chasing something, it's like, how can we either be in a certain place and be okay with, like you say, being in the garden, being in that space, being present, or becoming something. So you can be like looking at growth, looking at growing that awareness. But it's not about running away from something. It's not about chasing something. It's actually being present in your body and being intentional of what's going on. But I think for me, it's a systematic change, which is what I really love about your trends that are coming up. Is we can talk about doing gritting your feeding the grass all we want. But if the system is so wired that like it's so hard to even get time to think for yourself, we like that's what, like, you can talk about wellness Wednesdays all the time, but actually if the school or the system that's going on is on fire, there's a reason why I was getting my migraines. There's a reason why all that was happening to then have to go stand in the grass. It's an and of how do we systematically help ourselves in our own bodies, as well as how do we systematically make change so that we don't have to then go into the garden to then heal from what's going on in this first place. So it's an and for me. It's like that's what I'm looking at the minute. And I think it's like it's almost like changing the narrative of what that system is. So I think that's why I talked about you guys before about the idea. Like I've been looking at the idea of parallel paths, like in my own personal life. So like the way that I was living last year compared to what I live like now. So like last year I was working 2 jobs, had a house, went on the whole trajectory of like getting settling down basically. And so this year things have changed in my life that's kind of not where I'm on my trajectory anymore. And so it made me think about like whenever I was looking at like my house and looking at all the stuff that I curated over the years, I was like, what do they actually matter now? Like now that I have to change my whole life system, like I was chasing all these things that we say societally that we have to achieve or we have to have. And I think that's what's changed my perspective on what we're actually looking at as a system is what is success? What are we chasing? Why are we chasing it? And I think that's a very philosophical question, but it's not, it has tangible systematic impacts of that space, because it is like my whole life at the start of this year, I had to change, but I not, you don't always get like a catalyst where your whole life goes up in smoke and you have to adapt in it. But I've had to change now in my trajectory, and through having to change, it's made me question, do I need to be chasing that space? And so it's like, what can, like that parallel path I'm talking about, we're currently on a systematic way of working. And we almost have to create the parallel path that we are talking about right now, holistic education, because it's not going to, if we're talking about go out and get into the grass, that's not going to have a massive impact on teachers who are literally up to their eyeballs, stressed, going. That's the current path that they're on. But it's how can we have these conversations like you were having at the Edufuturists, like you were having the trends, to create a new pathway that then makes all those things possible. That instead of like carving out an hour of your time, it's actually what the system is. So you're not having to carve out an hour. It's actually a whole new system that we're making. And like I said, I don't have the complete golden ticket to what that system looks like yet, but I'm excited about the conversations we're having, because it sounds like that system is more possible right now because the conversations are going on.
But it's that neural pathways thing, isn't it? It's like that neuroplasticity stuff that you hear a lot of people talking about on in the space that we were talking before we came on to record about how difficult it is to teach an old dog new tricks. Well, yeah, we absolutely get that when you're younger, your neural pathways are not as developed, and therefore learning new things. Like my kids learn lyrics to songs and dances, TikTok dances and languages as quick as anything. That takes me a little bit longer now, but when I was a kid, I think about some of the lyrics I remember from when I was a teenager and a preteen. Like Steve knows every single Gary Barlow track. If you've listened to the episode about Gary Barlow, but my whole point, man, is that as kids you learn that stuff really easily because we have that neuroplasticity space. But the more recent research tells us, doesn't it, that there is more neuroplasticity than we think there is, even in older age, and learning new stuff is absolutely possible and necessary in order to maintain brain function. It's like that crazy cycle, isn't it? If you want to maintain good brain function, you've got to learn new things, and therefore you've got to create new pathways, and you've got to do different things and create that space. And that pathway that you're talking about there in education, there's a whole host of that we've created these systems and pathways that have to be done this way. And then, like you said, we go to burnout, or we go to migraines, or we go to mental health crisis, or we go to having to go and put my feet on the grass because you've got to an overload space. But actually we want to rewire the neuroplasticity in education systems to be able to then rechannel it, right?
And I think that's where I'm at now at the minute. So like what I've been putting together with the whole human ob is looking at how I facilitate that change. Because I think that's what I'm really interested in, is how change is like a human I think that's what I'm so interested in, is I knew at the start of this year that my life wasn't the way I wanted it to be. But even though I knew it wasn't right, it still took me so much to like change my mindset towards it. And it's like we're habitual humans. Like it's like we want to then create habits of like that space. So I think what I'm looking at the minute is how do we facilitate change in schools? Like leadership do want to change. But it's like, so whenever I was working in New Zealand, I was doing digital transformation with schools. So working with 4 or 5 schools and helping them go from having no digital space at all to then having one-to-one devices. And so that's a whole mindset shift. That's a whole ecosystem shift, really. And that's what we're talking about, is like that, those 2 pathways. How do you get onto that new pathway? And there's different people who can just jump at it, jump onto the next pathway. Let's go, let's make it happen. But very much so many people are like, no, that's not where I'm at. I don't know how to get there. And then they get blamed for not wanting to change. But actually, how are we facilitating that change? How are we supporting people to actually get from this point A to point B? The way we want to meet our kids where they're at, it's like, how do we meet adults where they're at too? And so that's why I'm looking at the idea of like bridge of becoming is what I'm working with the whole human hub. It's creating that bridge to educational success for leadership. So teaching teachers, leaders, and learners. And so it's like modeling to leadership. How do you get teachers to go from this is the way they are right now to that space? How do we look at government, look at policy? This is what we're currently at. How do we bridge the gap and bridge that space in between? So it's not about, like, neural pathways don't just form automatically. You have to myelinate. You have to keep going, keep building it, keep building it to then make the new pathway. So I think that's where I'm very interested in, is the space in between is what I talk about, is like, how do we bridge the gap of that space in between to go from where we are now to then where we go to next. And I think that's where how conversations can start.
I was in Yorkshire. I was in Harrogate. It's Yorkshire, right?
And I no, but I think it actually is. You weren't waffling. I think it's actually a really good point, because I was reading some of your things that came out about rewilding education, and I've been literally, so like I was in a breathwork course, and her whole thing is called Rewild. And I think I'm going to actually read, because I was looking at it a while ago, and I loved this part of it where it says like, we treat students, teachers, and leaders as though they're uniform seeds expected to grow in a predefined shape and size. I think that's so beautiful, but education shouldn't be about cultivating a monoculture of obedient plants. I think that's a gorgeous visual towards like that space of like actually what does. And I think that's what I'm not in denial of. Looking at something through the conformity lens is way easier, considering we are dealing with 30 kids in a classroom. It's so much easier to be like, this is our expectations, this is what we have to do. So I get why conformity has been how we've approached this in the past. And how can we reframe that lens to make, like you say, give people tools to be able to cope with 30 different personalities in the space? It's not about not doing it because it's hard. It's about how do we do it even though it's hard. And I think that's what I'm looking at. I actually want to, because Rewilding, I've actually wrote a little poem. So I'm a little poet now, guys, just so you know. I'm just a little person who goes in trees and like reads poetry. So can I actually read my poem? Because I think that really ties into what we're talking about with Rewilding. Because like that's kind of where it's all come from. So I'm going to read my poem. This is my first time I've actually been reading my poem out loud beyond my own bedroom. So here we go. So disconnected, discouraged, a lot of world feeling disease. Could it be our bodies are needing things changed a few degrees? Locked up inside, day in and day out, suppressed emotions hidden away, many bodies filled with fear, shame, and doubt. Longing to be seen, to feel awake and alive, looking for hope. Is it possible to find joy, not just live to survive? Rewilding, repairing, the rhythms of nature that have been lost. If we don't start rebuilding, can we imagine what will be the cost? We can learn a lot about from nature, each part patiently taking its own time to grow. Landscapes forever changing, rivers, seas, and oceans forever in flow. Watching a flame burn bright, then eventually turn to ashes, makes me wonder, do we have the tools to move through life's bright moments and its crashes? A caterpillar doesn't try to stop becoming a butterfly. So when our lives start to evolve, how might we face it instead of hide and get shy? Meeting people that help us explore our ever-changing story can help us connect and reflect, moving forward, I, you, and we. Like roots in a forest, deeply connected and individually playing their part. We as humans can have impact, I, you, and we, together making a start. Like seeds in soil, waiting to flower and bloom, moving between darkness and light, can we give ourselves and others space to create, not just consume? So that was my little rewilding story. I think that ties into like exactly what we're talking about with that idea of a caterpillar doesn't try to stop becoming a butterfly. And I think that's what I really resonated with your Rewilding post is so many times we try and create a new story for someone who doesn't even know their story yet. So how do we actually help people tell their story, not help them tell a story we think they should be telling? So
Something that resonated in that space is that I heard somebody talk about guardrails and actually living in a world where we need guardrails and actually working with young people and actually even adults. All of us are vulnerable at different points, right? Guardrails are a good thing that people in society, people who have got experience, perhaps people who have been there, might put things the edges of a road, at the edges of a cliff to say, do you know what? These are like buffers. And if you think about guardrails, I was driving back from Harrogate the other day, and you go on them windy roads. If anybody's been in that part of Yorkshire, back into Lancashire, it's an incredible view. It's an incredible drive coming back into God's County. But that when you go over them hills, there is a windy bit, and there's some really steep cliffs over the other side of it, right? Well, I've been on that in a double-decker bus, but I've also been on my car. The guardrails are there to kind of stop some of the stuff that would happen. If you wanted to carry on driving, you could go over the side of that guardrail. If you were driving too fast, you could go over the side of that guardrail. But it's almost like something that's a buffer that somebody's put in there saying, you might not see the edge of this. It's a bit of a guidance. It's that stuff what Steve's saying there. But it's not saying the only way through this is that way. And I also think the example that Steve used there about water, and if we said that your water has to flow this way, interesting thought process that actually the waterways that we have both sets of waterways. We have waterways that are natural, like a river or a stream, and then we have canals. Now, canals are very functional, and they got something industrially to from one place to the next. And rivers and stream, they go their own way, like Fleetwood Mac would say, right? But interesting in that space is that those rivers, if the power of that current is strong enough, it moves anything that's in its way anyway. So the principle that I'm thinking about here, like there's loads of stuff going on in my brain, which is not a surprise and not anything new. But that whole concept of water flowing, that if there are obstacles in a child's way, if there are obstacles in a learner's way, in a leader's way, if we allow the flow to happen, if those obstacles either goes round it and finds a way through, or it smashes it down anyway. I think that's a really interesting analogy that's come through there. And I think the work that you're trying to do there is there's different ways to skin a cat. You're talking about, like, for some people, it will be yoga. For some people, it will be breathwork. For some people, it will be journaling. For other people, it will be, I don't know, going off grid. It could be all of those things. And it might be that those things are seasonal or those things are permanent parts in their life. And that's all right, right? That's the point.
That's what, like, going back to like that analogy of the river, going back to water, going back to nature, and like it's not about it being like this, how do we add in? Because like there's just, if we just keep stuffing all this stuff into the current system, it's actually not, like, people are just going to break even more and need to go into grass even more. And it's about having a conversation of how do we change the system that we're currently in to then allow those like pathways to flow for those bridges to be built. And I think that's where I'm just really interested in it. Like I said, like before, like 2 years ago when I stopped, I was doing my podcast for years and doing all that kind of thing. And I stopped because I was so disheartened by the world that we were in. And I didn't feel like change was possible. But I do think there's a current on, like there's bubbles happening right now where people are having these types of conversations. We are connecting with the top level conversations as well as the grassroots space and making connections between the two. It might not be perfect yet. It might not be at all in anywhere near close to perfect, but at least we're having the conversations to talk about bridging that educational gap, creating the system. What could it look like? How do we get to that point? And I think that's what needs to happen is more conversations like that and people being open instead of it being that this is the only way happening. It's not, we can shift it. And I think that's what's exciting. Not yet. Actually, one of the reasons why I stopped doing what I was doing, because at that time there was so many people who were getting actually like attacked for whatever reason and whatever thing, and I was like, I don't think I know. Again, I don't think I knew enough about what I was standing up for to then have a voice in it. I think that's what's really interesting. So many people have like so many opinions about loads of stuff. It's like, what is the backing for that? And it's okay to have like conversations, is okay to have a bit of experimentation, but we are dealing with the future of education and the future of our kids and kids in general in the current state. So it's like, again, having those guardrails to then be curious and test things out on that other pathway that we're talking about. And I think what's really interesting, again, go back to the whole human hub, because I'm so interested in how humans work. And I think it really baffles me because it's like if my building's standing tall and your building's standing tall, yours is shadowing me. That doesn't have to be the case. It can be like my building can stand tall and your building can stand tall all at the same time, and we can both exist. But it's almost like sometimes people think my building won't be good because your building's too tall. But it's like, how can we actually build people's capacity for their own self? And I think that's where I've loved about this whole human adventure for me is I'm building my own building. It's not about someone else's building. It's actually my building and myself. And the more I'm learning about that, the more it's building confidence in me, which is why I'm so passionate for the whole human hub. It talks about creativity. It talks about confidence. It talks about communication. Because it's like the more that I feel like confident in myself, the less I'm trying to tear someone else's building down because I truly believe we can both exist at the same time and cheer on each other. So it's, yeah, how do we build confidence in that space for people?
Do you know what's really interesting? Ian Phillips talked about this on a recent podcast where he talked about competition versus comparators. Like we understand the concept of league tables and performance tables. Like it's comparators, they might be useful in that sense, but as long as they don't be just to be about competition, which really resonates there. And David Cameron, the real David Cameron, not the politician guy who came on the podcast as well, was talking exactly that about like there's enough space for all of us, and actually we're in this to support each other. And I know that's been my journey. I say this quite regularly about the people. We say this multiple times, and we said it at the Uprising about standing on the shoulders of giants. And that isn't just the unbelievable people like the David Prices and Bob Harrisons and others. It's those people who gave us our first gigs, like the Andy Caffreys and the Al Kingsleys and the Ian Nairns and the others that do you know what I mean, that have helped us out when we're new to this game, right? And then the whole conversation about how does that pay it forward. I reckon I've probably had in the last 6 months more than 10 conversations with people who are starting up into a space or just say, can I just grab 10 minutes with you, or could you just, do you know an accountant? Have you done this? Have you done that? Like those things, like, and I don't say that for any other reason that the whole conversation here is there is if we're doing good things, there's enough space for everybody. And that's hard. I'm not going to lie to you, because like you recommend people for things or you put some people in, and that might mean that you don't get that work. But I live. Somebody said to me, "What's your mantra for life?" I think I was on a podcast. What's your mantra for life? I'm like, oh, that's a bit deep. You're going to have to start doing breath work and yoga shit soon. The mantra, and I actually wholeheartedly believe that with this statement, that with the same measure that you use, it's the same measure that'll be brought back to you. Like it's a whole serious conversation that is, I know that if I want generosity to come into my life, I want options to come into my life, I want support for my kids to come in, I just got to pay that. I just got to put that out into the world. And it might not come back from that person, but it will come back, and it has done every single time.
And it's a mindset shift. Like it is a beautiful thing to actually like that's exact same as me this year. Like I'm actually doing some Malta's confirmed now, Ben. Thank you very much. That's another thing that like you connected me with, and I think that's so beautiful. Is going back to what Steve said about worrying if you're going to get your house tear down because you're putting yourself out there to be courageous. I think that's what I loved connecting with you guys from last year was the more we can create space for people to be like, I know if you're going to test something out, I know your core, Ben's core and Steve's core is like good. The good intentions are there. And the more we connect as a community, the more like I had a chat with Al Kingsley last week, and he was just being so supportive in the space of, I see what you're trying to do. Let's see what this community looks like. Working with Evo, I worked with him for so long, like away online. And then you create this community of people that want you to try, want you to be curious, want you to give it a go. And then it starts to snowball. The snowball effect of like this year is I didn't know at the start of this year what my life was going to look like. I was like, oh my gosh, the whole thing's gone. It's done. But actually, the more that you're talking about, Ben, about like the idea of abundance, the idea of like I can succeed and you can succeed. Let's build our buildings together. It's such a beautiful way to look at the world, and it's not as scary then. It's like, oh, like you're giving me permission to build my building, I'm giving you permission to build your building. Let's just give it a go and see what happens. And I think like that goes back to the fear. The fear for me is basically gone now, because I acknowledge that people are in this space wanting to succeed. And I think that's how can we then cultivate that culture in schools? How do we cultivate that culture with the psychological safety that we're talking about in that space? So yeah, I think that's why I'm really interested in what the whole human hub for me is, and why I wanted to connect with Edufuturists is I believe that is the underlying mission of both buildings that we're looking to make. My gosh. I would the environments. I would change the engaging environments of how we support our kids. So yeah, looking at what that looks like.
Okay, what's the most exciting education trend that you are seeing currently?
Holistic education getting talked about more, talking about like, and just seeing how it's woven together, like seeing text help, seeing Patty and like all the things they're doing in that space, like seeing how we can actually look at inclusion and innovation and have conversations like this is so exciting. Ken Robinson, every single day. I got to see him in 2017 live at Bet. And that was honestly, like, my friends kept being like, who's that man who you're taking selfies with? Why are you posting about this? I was like, yep. So buzzing. Ken Robinson will forever be my main person.
Yeah, I hear that one. Well, it's been absolutely class. We expected it to be. I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while, and we are championing you. We believe what you're doing is super important. The world needs more of this, and wherever we can support that, you know that we will. And we're very grateful that you are in our world, because you bring a way of seeing things and that kooky stuff that some people call. You make it relatively normal. And encourage, and I suppose encourage people like us brutes to really think about things that matter. So we're grateful for you. The world needs more people like you, and thank you for being on the podcast. We know that you're going to go from strength to strength. We know Malta's going to be awesome, and hopefully very soon we'll be able to catch up again in person. Thanks, Naomi, for joining us on another wonderful episode of the Edufuturists podcast. And if you want to join Naomi at Edufuturist Uprising 2025, the link is in the show notes. I'm saying that, I'm presuming she's coming. She came last time, so I presume she'll come again if she can. June 2025, nominations for awards and all that kind of stuff is going to start coming out. Watch this space on that. But yeah, you can get all your tickets. We've kept the tickets as cheap as possible. We're going to Manchester. We'd love you to be part of that and keep having these conversations about how we can shape the now and the future of education. So yeah, thank you so much for being with us, Naomi.
Thank you.